And we are ready to go. If I may invite Richard to start our event.
All right, good evening and welcome to the first presentation of a 5-part webinar series. My name is Richard Witham and I'm the chair of the Greater Sudbury Watershed Alliance. Joining me on screen is Terry Rees, the executive director of the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations, Bree Edwards from the Valley Living with Lakes Centre, and Dr. John Gunn, our speaker for this evening. The Greater Sudbury Watershed Alliance recognizes the ancestral land on which we live and work as the traditional territory of the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, Algonquin, and Métis peoples. This territory is covered by the treaties of Robinson-Huron, Manitoulin Island, Treaty 9, and with Wikwemikong remaining unceded. We offer our gratitude to the First Nations for their protection of and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor these teachings. We're recording all the webinars, and the links to the recordings will be posted on our respective websites so that those of you who are unable to join us this evening, and anyone else for that matter, will be able to still view the presentations. The Greater Sudbury Watershed Alliance acts to protect, promote, and advocate for improvements in water quality and healthy watersheds. We have representation from 22 lake and creek stewardships and 2 First Nations. And although much of our focus is on the protection of the local watersheds, we also respond to municipal and provincial government activities that create greater environmental risk. When COVID-19 forced the cancellation of our yearly in-person educational event, we decided to hold a virtual event and extend a broad invitation. We are very grateful to have partnered with the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations and with Valley Living with Lakes Centre in the presentation of the Troubled Waters webinar series. All 3 organizations have worked very hard on the development, promotion, and delivery of this event. We are also indebted to the additional organizations and individuals who have helped promote this series, resulting in local, across Canada, US, and international registrations. And I'm just going to bring up a poll and ask you to respond to the questions so that we can get an idea of where everyone is coming from.
And we're getting responses. I'll just let you know that it takes a moment for everyone to join in there. So we'll wait for a second.
Are you sharing now, Michelle?
Yes, I am, Richard. Can you see the result?
Okay, so it looks like most of the people are from the Greater Sudbury area. We have a few from Northern Ontario, many from the South, outside of Canada, 3 people from the USA, and 2 people from an international location. I certainly hope your time zone is not too skewed and compared to ours. Thanks, Michelle. So that information is going to be helpful to us, and it'll also assist all of the presenters to fine-tune their remarks to better reflect the composition of the audience. Over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Richard. My name is Terry Rees. I'm the executive director of the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations, or FOCA. FOCA is pleased to be co-hosting this series along with the Greater Sudbury Watershed Alliance and the Valley Living with Lakes Centre. We're overwhelmed with the amount of enthusiasm and interest for this 5-part series. We have had over 400 registrants. At least half of you are here already tonight. We hope you'll enjoy these presentations from some of the leading water experts of our time. FOCA is an Ontario not-for-profit organization. We have over 500 member associations from all over the province. We represent the interests of Ontario's 250,000 waterfront property owners on the issues that matter most to our communities and to our families. We compile a lot of our information on these important issues and make them available through our website at foca.on.ca. And we encourage you to visit us online to find answers to all of your questions. We also have a monthly alert called the FOCA alert, which is distributed to about 11,000 people every month. And that's on topical information, news, and other updates that are important to people that live on and around the water. For almost 60 years, FOCA's members have identified water quality as their #1 concern and interest. COVID or not, our freshwater systems continually face many challenges and threats. We believe through understanding these complex systems more thoroughly that we can build an appreciation for their dynamic nature and ultimately build a stewardship ethic so that together we can do our part to keep our lakes great. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the 600 or so participants who help every year in volunteering with the Ontario Lake Partner Program. It's a long-standing partnership between FOCA and the Ontario Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and this provides a great deal of valuable data, much of it used and by some of the researchers that we'll be hearing from during this series. We're blessed with an abundance of freshwater in Ontario and with a lot of thought leadership too. We've got some world-class speakers and they're going to be addressing some of the most important issues facing us in the years ahead. I've been asked to provide some logistics about the Zoom platform. Many of you, I'm sure, have been become accustomed to it in recent months, but here's a few tips. You're all muted for the purposes of keeping the noise to a dull roar and so that the speaker can carry on uninterrupted. If you do experience technical difficulties, if the sound cuts out or doesn't come back at some point, it could be an issue with your internet capacity. If it does drop off, it's sometimes best to just drop right off, exit the webinar, and then come back in and reconnect. To pose questions for the speaker, you can mouse over your screen or tap if you're on an iDevice and find the Q&A button where you're encouraged to type your questions. If you don't see the Q&A button, look under the 3 dots for more. And you can add your questions as they occur to you during the presentation, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And we plan to wrap up about 8:30 this evening. Thanks for attending tonight, and we hope you enjoy the presentation. Stay safe and be well. I'd like to pass it over to Bree Edwards.
Thanks, Terry. I'm Bree Edwards. I'm a research scientist with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, focused on northern inland waters. And I'm lucky to call the Valley Living with Lake Center my professional home. I wish I could be there more often right now. The Living with Lake Center is a beautiful state-of-the-art facility that is located on Laurentian University campus and on the shores of Ramsey Lake. And it is the home to the Cooperative Freshwater Ecology Unit. And so this unit is kind of we like to think of ourselves as a center of excellence, sort of a think tank that brings together academics and government researchers and different groups, as well as continued support from industry, including Vale and Glencore. It's my great pleasure today to be introducing our first speaker in the series, Dr. John Gunn. Dr. Gunn was one of the co-founders of the Cooperative Freshwater Ecology Unit 30 years ago, 31, I think now, John. He's a professor at Laurentian University and a Canada Research Chair. He's also our director at the Living with Lake Center. And he started his career sort of like me as a scientist with the Ministry of Natural Resources, working to understand the aquatic impacts of acidification and metal pollution in the Sudbury area. He has since transitioned, of course, into his professorship role and co-authored hundreds of research publications on all things boreal and northern aquatic science, from restoration ecology to multiple stressors and now emerging concerns. John is a tireless champion of research and collaboration and has mentored countless students and early career scientists, including myself. And today, John will be drawing on this richness of experience and turning his lens forward to imagine what's possible for lived-in watersheds by 2050 and beyond as they face environmental concerns of our times. So without further ado, Dr. John Gunn.
Thank you, Bree. And I think if we can get the technology to work, I'll load this talk. We are tonight going to step back from this troubled waters and also troubled times and imagine Sudbury in 30 years from now, assuming that we've done some things right and also consider if we've failed in some regards. But I've been inspired by a lot of people around me in Sudbury. Sudbury is a case history for tonight, but it's a model system for industrial cities around the world. And is a big enough story that we'll focus mainly on Sudbury tonight. And we've just gone through an international competition in Sudbury for imagining the city in terms of architecture and design for the future. And what I'm showing you right now on the screen is an image of the Francophone team of many hundreds, I believe, that competed in the international competition that won the competition at the MacEwan School of Architecture just not too many weeks ago. And panelists like Bruce Mao and other global thinkers oversaw this fantastic competition. I've picked out of their collection of beautiful images, an image that I found interesting, and it'll be familiar to many others. It happens to be where they imagine the downtown in the Memorial Park to look like in 30 years. The rest of the design is a city with electrical vehicles. It's a city mainly of massive wood construction. They imagined the future of being largely carbon storage in the form of wood construction, but we'll touch a little bit on that tonight. But when I was struck by this picture, for those that know the site, they have imagined that we will daylight Junction Creek, which is currently buried underneath the city. And the term seve refers to sap, or the thawing of the hardened landscape, bringing nature into the city. But I know a little bit about Junction Creek, so I didn't criticize this design, but I think now they might have added one more element to it. And that is brook trout in the downtown of Sudbury. And this was the dream now 30 years ago of an award-winning conservation group, the Junction Creek Stewardship Committee. And they had the crazy idea, I think I was one of them, that you could take one of the most polluted streams in the entering the Great Lakes. It actually left a major signature metal deposit at the mouth of the Spanish River that one of our last speakers, John Small, started his career on. But this was a sewage deposit. This was a horrendous stream. And today, many years later, it does indeed support brook trout in the downtown area. But I do have to step back and think about some reality checks at this point. This stream was covered because in the last 100 years, 28 people drowned in this site from flash floods because of poorly managed watersheds. The last person to drown in this stream was 2008. And if we step back away from the stream itself and think about the headwaters and how we will have to manage those into the future, some serious issues start to come to mind. There are indeed some troubled waters that we will have to address and be innovative in solving. So if we step back away from that location, in the bottom, we realize that the drainage going through the city of Sudbury drains one of the largest waste mine storage areas in the world. The Coppercliff tailings area draining through Nolan Creek enters the headwaters of this, and the expansion is a picture of the lime plant. That this stream can only effectively be neutralized with continuous lime addition. So how are we going to manage that into the future? North of the city is the Ponderosa wetland that regulates the floods as well as the dams above there. And this area is under heavy development pressure, people wanting to drain it literally at this as we speak. So are we going to put in place the protection and and the controls that will allow this architecture dream to be a reality. Sudbury is a unique place, and I'm proud to represent them tonight. These are inspiring groups and inspiring people that many of them are on tonight. So I thank you for the work you do. I often just take the big level pictures, but you fight in the trenches, whether it's the Livable Sudbury crowd or Conservation Sudbury or the VTAC teams, or the kids that are working with Greta Thornburg and others on Friday for Futures. This is a creative, talented town with passionate people, and one of the first cities to declare a climate emergency. So thank you for the inspiration for tonight's talk. As Bree mentioned, I come from a research center perspective, and this is really my working title, that Sudbury is a city primed for change. And I had to bring on some of my talented colleagues here, Nate Basilico, a specialist on land, and Nadia Mikachuk, a specialist in microbial issues of all sorts, and realize that 30 years from now, they will be working and I will not. And we'll need to invest greatly in youth and talent going forward. But when you look at the Lake Center today, it is won many awards, and one of them is the Design with Wood Award. And you can see in the interior of the building, the spectacular wood construction. And one way I look at that building today and view the climate challenges around the world is the safest place to put carbon is in the building, not in those trees. The California fires, the incidence of fire to the north is that we realize that trees might not be the safest solution to climate change, in spite of the Prime Minister's recent announcement and the general support for the billion tree plan or the trillion tree plan worldwide. We have to think again about that strategy, and I'll do a little bit of that tonight. But wood is itself is a very effective way of storing, and so I just would see that building actually represents 180 tons of stored carbon, and has great potential that way. I've got to acknowledge that it's young people and young talents that are going to make this happen. And we feel as a group that we contribute to this better future. And here are the people that I give credit to. We're helping to train, but they're bringing their own talents of critical thinking, elite science communicators and innovators. And they are represented here tonight. So for those that aren't aware, we're entering in on June the 5th of this year, the UN Decade of Restoration, where the world has to move forward with dealing with both climate change and the biodiversity loss. And the Sudbury example is going to have to be brought forth to show that things are possible, even in the most desolate of challenges. So here is the transformation of Sudbury from a barren land and not too long to, this picture would coincide when I arrived in Sudbury myself, and a young, she's not listening now, unhappy wife that, are we really going to stay here? But Sudbury looks like this today, a remarkably clean city. And today, the super stack in the background is slowly being torn down. In a very few years, there will be no super stack. But when we look at the two views of Sudbury, you can see the work of the community and the work of clean air, and you realize the greenery provides great value to the city. And these are some of the attributes of the forest. Those horrible floods that killed that many people are dampened by these forests. Clean water, clean air, erosion control. Of course, the habitat is in support of biodiversity. And then many local levels and at larger landscape levels, shading and cooling, changing wind patterns, and then producing products in the climate future, biomass fuels and other products. And carbon offsets. I won't call for a quiz, but I'll ask for a mental quiz and I can see if I can pick up the number from you. So if you look at this landscape today and you compare it to the Sudbury emissions, I'll give you a little hint. The mining industry doesn't produce very many carbon CO2 units. Much of the production of that is from homes and fossil fuel burning. But if you look at the vast forest that's been planted and 10 million trees, do you think on an annual basis, those trees take up 2%, 10%, 20%, or 50%, or maybe 80% of the annual emissions of the city? You can submit that, but I'll give you the answer right now. It's about 2%. So all of this vast forestry only absorbs about 2% of the annual emissions of that city. Now, whatever you did froze my key.
Sorry about that.
All right. So for those that are international tonight and those that are outside of Sudbury, you may not fully recognize this figure, but everybody from Sudbury who's seen me talk has seen this figure every time I talk. And it's the tremendous success of pollution reduction in Sudbury. When in 1960, the same year the university was built, and the first year that the first published paper from Sudbury was published by Allen and Gordon and Evel Gorham, Sudbury was the world's largest point source of sulfur dioxide at 2.5 million tons. Put that in perspective, all of China today produces about 10 million tons. And 2.5 million tons is greater than all of industrial Europe today. And we would produce that in a single year. I had to let my dog out the door. He was stuck in the bedroom here with me. So this fantastic figure is something that we've brought to the UN. We've brought over time to various negotiations worldwide. And it's something Sudbury and Canada can be enormously proud of. But the important point is the industry itself is still thriving, even now with 99% emission reductions. And the lakes, Norman Yan, who speaks next week, I think this is where Norm partially began his career. The lakes are responding to the clean air itself without any land or liming itself. We're seeing the pH of the lakes improving under the influence of clean air alone. And this is a very rewarding phenomena that we simply have to focus on source control. We don't have to spend our entire lives on remedial work. Nature can rebound if given a chance. And that's where we learned that microbial processes that weren't typically part of our classical studies were key to the generation of alkalinity and the cleaning up of the lakes. So there are some of our ancient relatives, the sulfate reducing bacteria. They themselves are more than 3 billion years old. They are doing the heavy lifting in many of our lakes of doing the final cleaning and polishing. The community has also responded to clean air. And this is not necessarily causation, but I believe it must be that as clean air was achieved, and the black line is the declining air pollution. Look at the way the community responded, building a science center, going to the United Nations and winning the Earth Summit Award for their regreening work, creating an underground snow lab for neutrinos, 2 more community colleges, the 4th largest film festival in Canada, Science North, Ontario's top tourist destination, and to win a Nobel Prize in an old mining shaft and Canada's Happy City. So clean air and source control is the basis for rejuvenation of many industrial cities. And some of our Russian colleagues were confirming that they're making major improvements in air quality and expect this sort of community response as well. An issue is always economics. And here is a tremendous figure. This represents the Glencore company in Sudbury, showing in yellow as air pollution reduces, their nickel production actually increases. So modernization, innovation, it starts with good government. It starts with good regulations and fair treatment of industries. It calls on what's called the Michael Porter hypothesis, that competition and regulations can force innovation to the benefit of the company. It's like our parents telling you it's good for you, and you don't know it till you've done it. But the cleanup of Sudbury has helped human health. It's helped the bottom line, and it's allowed nickel production to continue and expand. Tonight, I'm going to think of the Sudbury story from an ecological point of view, taking on some perspectives that on disturbance ecology and the connectivity of the systems, and nutrient and elemental cycling, and share those with you. So we've gone through some pretty rough times. We're in a really rough time now in all ways, financially, medically. Can disturbance rejuvenate a city? Can we come out of this determined to fix some of the underlying problems, including the climate issues? And then to use the Sudbury example, there are massive disturbances here, and the city itself is the result of a meteorite impact. The city was ground down by glaciers. The city was the home for the largest mining complex on Earth and one of the biggest polluters on Earth. And now it's the impact of climate change. But the meteorite, if you take a somewhat positive spin on these things, the meteorite created one of the largest and most valuable ore bodies on Earth, the Sudbury Basin. The glacier scoured out 330 lakes to create the city of lakes, and all the tourists and 15% of people live on lakes as a result of the glaciers and their grinding action that they come through here. Climate change is a terrible threat, but will the city respond with as the architects thought, with a new design with wood, a new climate capture technologies? And will the mining industry be the source of the e-economy metals that will run the autonomous vehicles and create the batteries that will eliminate the need for fossil fuel? Well, from the connectivity point of view, we've learned a few things already. We started our careers in silos where the water people worked in the lakes and the land people worked on the land and never went to the same meetings. And over time, we realized that land reclamation was having dramatic effects on lakes. So as time went on, and this is an example of Silver Lake, where the land reclamation and the source control reduced the trace contaminants in this lake. In 1995, Bill Keller and I classified it as the most atmospherically polluted metal contaminant lake we knew of in the world, where copper was at 0.5 milligram and nickel was over 1 milligram per liter. and the acidity was down near 4. So, but today it is the home of fathead minnows, one of the most sensitive species. And this is a combination of designing reclamation work in a watershed perspective so that you get the benefit of downstream effects. And the VTAC committee works in that fashion now, and many of the other groups do. Now, one of the elements of the city that we didn't know too much about was the role of organics from the land. And to simplify things, I call what is called dissolved organic carbon forest tea. Because when you take a tea bag and you add warm water, the brown color coming out is tea. When you put a forest and organic material on the land and you add warm water, what comes out is dissolved organic carbon. But this growing forest and return of organic matter to the water has magical properties in the city that it detoxifies and binds up the residual metals. So the forest is giving us a medicine, if you would, that is binding up. And maybe it's true that people can live on tea alone. I think a few crackers thrown in there is good though. And oddly enough, some of the pollutants are in the sweet spot where one pollutant is currently protecting us from another. And that one is the magical effect of selenium in Sudbury, where if you go to cottage country in Algonquin Park, you'll find the mercury levels in fish are higher than beside the superstack in Sudbury in an industrial land. They're higher in the fish, but they're not necessarily higher in the water, and they're not higher in the air, the sources coming in. But because mercury is interfered in its uptake into the animal by selenium, that's why selenium appears in your supplements, in your Costco supplements you take. It helps block the uptake of mercury. And right now we're in a sweet spot where what is a toxicant at higher concentration is blocks mercury at current levels. Now, we don't know whether that will persist into the long-term future because selenium is going down as we clean up the smelter. So we may lose some of the protective effects of that, but I hope in the meantime we will have eliminated the use of fossil fuels in the world, because that is the major source of mercury. So when we're talking about fossil fuel reduction, coal in particular for carbon, it's also the source of mercury. So you get a benefit from that. Now, trees have some other magical features. The climate in Sudbury is warming, but as we've added more and more trees, we've changed the surface winds. That on the lake that I showed you, Clearwater Lake, in a study, Norm and a student who's now a prof at Cambridge University, he showed the surface winds was declining by 35% as the trees were changing the texture of the land and slowing down wind. Slowing down the warming, forcing effect of warm wind so much that the overall temperature of the lake declined. Oddly enough, yes, as climate was warming, the average temperature in the lake was declining through the protective effect of one, the physical features of the trees, and two, this forest tea, this organic material flowing into the lakes, which was shading the bottom waters from sunlight and keeping them cold, to the point that off to the left-hand side is a picture of the first lake trout in 50 years to return to the downtown lakes of Sudbury and naturally reproduced. An Arctic relic is now reproducing in climate warming Sudbury. But that can't go on forever, and we can't allow that warming to continue because we will overwhelm the system. The trees are also linked to the food web in the lakes that we didn't know before, and this is just introducing some of the basic science that these disturbed ecosystems can provide. So as trees release their energy and organic material it feeds up to the system, and we were able to show that fish in this Nature of Things episode called What Trees Talk About. I think they talk about the fact that they're feeding fish and that fish are bigger in areas that are benefiting from trees. And you prove that by looking at the growth rings in these tiny fish that are related to those trees. But the climate impacts are real and scary. And one of the pictures in there is my own house that I have to vacate at the end of this month because of the ice damage here. The extreme events that are hitting Sudbury with these floods are, with rain on snow, are going to come and are going to be far more severe in the future. And what broke my roof in the ice storm also broke 89 other roofs at the time. And we're all under insurance claims, and our insurance is going to go up, up, up to cover these. That the building code is not keeping up with the risk that these winter ice storms will represent. Also, we don't yet see extreme temperatures in Sudbury that kill fish, except in the cases where we've mistreated the lake with excessive nutrients. Lakes like McFarland Lake now, where the nutrient levels are such that fish in the bottom waters have to come to the surface to avoid the anoxia of the bottom. We're seeing the death of whitefish or cisco in McFarland on occasion the last couple of years. And this was an extreme case of a high temperature event while white suckers, a very tolerant fish, was migrating out of the lake that receives our sewage treatments. So while we deal with climate change, we also have to be overly vigilant and overly protective of excessive nutrients and eutrophication. What was acceptable before in terms of the way we treat our lakes is not acceptable in the future under climate vulnerabilities. The main thing that most people will see is not those deaths, but they will see the switching of species and the invasion of the area with warm water species. And when I first arrived in Sudbury, we were at about the northern limit to where smallmouth bass could reproduce and produce a young that's large enough to overwinter without feeding. Now smallmouth bass are up to the James Bay coast and invading the rivers going into the subarctic. And when smallmouth bass invade other lakes, they live in the epilimnion. Their temperature tolerance is up to 30 degrees. And so they can live where most of the prey species live, the small minnows and such. So they deplete the food resources, and cold water species that come to those shallow waters starve as a result. So you can see in this survey that the amount of lake trout in northern lakes is reduced by about 77% when bass move into those lakes. So this is going to be the phenomena that'll be more commonly observed at first than the death ones. Now, the issue that Nate is a specialist on, and I want to bring to your attention, is the argument around carbon storage. And we are in the midst of a big project called LCARE, looking at carbon storage in accompanying the emission reduction opportunity for trees. So you see a before and after picture, and you imagine there's a lot of carbon stored there. But the living tree only stores about 20%. And the dead wood in that picture, I went back and found the same dead tree those many years apart, stores about 20%. So that 20% of wood could actually go to wood construction and be safer from fire if we had properly managed housing construction. But where most of the carbon is stored in boreal forests is in the soil, about 60%. And that is where industrial landscapes, and I think this last year was the UN Year of Soil, the soil is the foundation on which all life in the biosphere exists. And we have to be vigilant about our soils. And right now, globally, the soils of the world are badly damaged. The foundation for life is badly damaged. In Sudbury, we're trying a number of interesting experiments and techniques. The industry itself is using calcium treatments and adding fertilizer and seed directly to rock and trying to build up soils directly. The city is going and harvesting topsoil and vegetation in advance of highway development and moving understory plants into the area as nucleation to bring in those species that are missing. Graham is standing on an experiment at the Valley tailings where we're using human biosolids from the sewage treatment plant to not only cover the tailings and prevent them from oxidizing and releasing acid mine drainage, but as a way of growing biofuels on them. And then the other one, which is the magic of nature itself, is the lichens. The lichens were absent from Sudbury. The area with its black rocks was particularly black because there were no white or gray lichens on it. And lichens after every glacial event is the way we begin to create soil. And lichens are super sensitive to air pollutions. So as we dealt with pollution controls, we've given nature's most powerful engineer, the lichens, the opportunity to return to Sudbury en masse to begin the soil building process. Where carbon is generally stored in the greatest concentration on the boreal shield is in the wetlands and peatlands. And I started this talk showing the Ponderosa wetland. It's a very degraded wetland, and you can see the power of this cute guy, the bogman stuck in there, shows you how well you can store carbon in a peatland. The anoxic conditions, the acidity, the microbial community is ideal for storing vast amounts of carbon in wetlands. And the creation of wetlands in our region is a product of this plant in the top corner, the sphagnum moss. And like the lichens, sphagnum is super sensitive to air pollution. So the Ponderosa wetland above the city is now a source of carbon to the atmosphere rather than a sink, because through air pollution, we've killed off the sphagnum in there. So if we leave wetlands sphagnum free, they will be a serious source of methane and CO2 to the atmosphere. And that vast storage of carbon, like the permafrost of the north, is on its way into the atmosphere. So we're experimenting with ways of restoring peatland. There's lots of wonderful research in Laval and other places in Canada about peatland restoration. And we have some really promising work going on in Sudbury. Mike Waddington's group from McMaster is contributing to this with Peter Beckett and Nate Basilico and others. And the survey that was just reported the other day was very promising that sphagnum is now coming back on many of the damaged wetlands. If we consider mining and the legacy of mining, we have to accept the fact that we've done an awful lot of damage in mining around the world, in the old technology of mining. And a lot of it resides now with the public purse. There's 5,000 abandoned mine sites that you and I as taxpayers are responsible for. The owners are long since gone. Current practices, the companies are bonded, that they have to open a closure plan before they open a mine, and they have to have money in the bank to do that work. So we're in much better shape today than in the past, but we're still left with vast numbers of abandoned mines. And one of the largest mining activities in Ontario is aggregate mining, gravel and sand. And gravel and sand pits alone are 20,000 hectares of bare land. So we have abandoned mine sites, we have abandoned pits. Can we not, instead of sacrificing good land for that is needed for agriculture and food supply, these destitute lands could be used for energy production? And I'm showing the example of the solar farm out in Cape Real that is now occupying an abandoned gravel pit. And Graham is again standing on the tailings pile where growing crops and carbon fuels, as well as energy production like solar wind farms, would be the prime location rather than sacrificing forests or agricultural land. Now we're thinking about the forest itself in terms of products. The forest industry in Ontario has suffered an awful lot of loss. You know, the US have not been very friendly with us with the softwood lumber trading, and many, many jobs have been lost in Ontario. And in many ways, we've been reduced to a producer of toilet paper and fiber. And there's a lot of creative ideas around cellulose fibers and replacements for plastic in the future. But I bring to your attention what Quebec is acting like like Sweden does and IKEA. Rather than sell toilet paper, sell furniture or finished products. And one of the most interesting one is the Clt Massive Timbers. These are highly manufactured cross-laminated timber that can be used to replace all steel and concrete in modern buildings. And Quebec and I believe British Columbia now allow buildings at least 6 stories high. They're looking at 13 stories, I think, in British Columbia, where massive timber is the only construction material used. And last year, we opened the first tiny CLT plant in southern Ontario near Brock University. Strange place to have it, where the timber is up in the north. So I would argue that instead of making toilet paper in the future, we should be producing carbon storing industrial lumber. The reality check is this. I opened up with a quiz, and this is the models for Sudbury out to 2050. Sudbury currently is a city mainly through transportation and wasteful heating and lights, and is producing about 1.3 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. And with all the changes possible in the business as usual, efficiencies could get us maybe less than 10% down. Drastic changes like complete conversion to electric vehicles, complete moving to smaller houses, densification can get us to 10 or at most 20% gap remaining. And that is where we hope that new technologies and the expanded efforts on regreening may come in and fill that final gap. But when you see it discussed in the newspaper that carbon offset can still allow oil pipelines and other contentious issues, there is no equivalence. We can only get to this final future that the architects imagined with the complete elimination of fossil fuel use in the city by 2050. The regreening effort might get us 10%, but this is pretty well Nate's modeling analysis that without that 30-year perspective, we've got to eliminate the entire use of fossil fuels in the city. We also have to keep the spirit of the people and people working in a positive way going forward. And Sudbury is really good at this, and we've done tremendous things as a community. And we've got to show it and educate people the power of what we're doing here. And there's one little cute forest on the campus at Laurentian where we dedicated a plaque to the workman, the landscaper that planted trees in his favorite spot. And we named it Beppy's Carbon Offset Forest. And one of the perspectives is that this little forest produces enough oxygen to keep 10 to 20 students alive every year. And in its efforts has stored 50 tons of carbon in the battle in climate change. So these symbolic and educational sites are very powerful, and we need to do more of them and let people feel the good work that people are doing and see things progress. And we need leadership. And I was honored to have our honorary degree, Dr. Cindy Blackstock, the Indigenous scholar and listed in any listing as among the top 50 Canadians. She sees the climate battle and as one of justice. And, you know, as our Dr. Gary Bodo mentioned in the circular economy meeting the other day, it's not the rich cottage owners that might be on tonight that are going to suffer in the climate. It's the poorer people that can't afford insurance and can't afford air conditioning, and the floods will leave mold in basements, and the slip and fall accidents are all very much a justice issue that Cindy Blackstock speaks to. And Jane Goodall has carried the story of Sudbury around the world and uses this example of the greening of Sudbury and her Roots and Shoots program, some of which have started here in Sudbury. And she has joined her power of her influence in helping restore Junction Creek, with brook trout. And this is Jane many years ago, and she wasn't very good at catching brook trout in a can. I had to help her. She's good at catching chimpanzees, I believe, but she needed a hand with that. But she carries that leaf from Sudbury, a green leaf, around the world as a sign of hope. And I hope from tonight's presentation you might take some of these stories as well as a sign of hope. I'm just about finished, but I wanted you to look at Ed Bertinski's, the famous landscape architect or photographer for Canada, who wrote and directed the Anthropocene. This is his famous picture from Sudbury, and I was going to ask you to do another quiz for me, a mental quiz. So what words come to your mind when you look at this picture of the tailings, the Copper Cliff tailings? Did I hear disaster, moonscape? I heard all those words. No, you don't. I hear them now. Yes. What I see after Nadia's told me what I'm looking at is the word bountiful life and alternate energy. And something that's not an insurmountable problem, but perhaps part of the solution. And that is the same microbial communities that taught us how much acid Clearwater Lake could absorb and how much the microbes themselves could deal with. The sulfur and iron oxidizing bacteria is what you're looking at. You're looking at the explosion of life creating these iron colors, similar to a red sockeye salmon run coming into a West Coast river. This is life in all its bounty, but it's a different form of life. probably the most oldest form of life, where the alternate energy is iron. And as our members of parliament like to explain it to the public, these creatures can eat iron and pee out copper and nickel into solution that can then be commercially harvested by electroplating. And we sit with a vast supply of waste in Sudbury. The waste pile you're looking at there now, not only through the metabolism of these organisms, draws CO2 from the atmosphere, not in huge amounts, but it's a net accumulator. But that landscape in its waste pile has $7 to $8 billion worth of leftover nickel and similar billions of other metals that are needed for the e-economy. And we need to genetically engineer these ancient relatives to harvest those materials for us. And instead of opening all the new mining sites that might be needed in the future. So putting our mind around this idea that waste and the circular economy, that what is one waste has to be the product for another industry. One of the things that this waste research has shown us is there are unusually valuable products in extreme environments. One is the algae that appear at abandoned mine sites. These algae make their living by resisting the pollutants around them. And the way they do that is building up thicker and thicker lipid walls. And those lipid walls allow algae to adapt to extreme environments. But lipid is the source of clean fuels. So this researcher and some of her other team members have been able to find extreme algae that produce extreme amounts of lipid that can be used as a clean fuel in underground vehicles, eliminating the need for fossil fuels. She has also found that those extremophiles, like anytime we look into nature, has other attributes, and one of them is some pharmaceuticals that currently look very promising in treating cancer cells. This is mine waste I'm talking about here. The vision of what a mine waste technology center will look like in the future is the work of Nadia Mikachuk. And this is, I spent a lot of my career helping and working to build the Lake Center, and Nadia is going to build this Center for Mine Waste Biotechnology for the future, and building the bacterial and other microbial solutions to these global problems. And this, I'll just show it with a tiny video if it works, is the vast amounts of waste that are sitting out there are still a source of energy for these microbes. And these microbes, about 30% of the copper mining in the world is actually mined by bacteria in warm countries. They don't build smelters and melt the ore. They crush the ore and put it in piles in warm climates, add water and bacteria, and the bacteria extract the metals which are then electroplated. We've got the challenge of colder climates, so we've got to find climate adapted or cold adapted microbes to do the same work. And that's the kind of work these folks work on. So you take a waste rock pile, and what the bacteria are doing is looking for energy and breaking down those molecules, which lets the acid and metals slip out in solution. You harvest the acid to make sulfuric acid or to liquid sulfur dioxide to keep apples red, and you pocket the copper and nickel. That's the technology that is possible to deal in the future. And this is the kind of thinking we have to proceed with. And that is at the stage now of thinking of an incubator business enterprise that Nadia is heading up and is in the pre-feasibility phase right now. And of course, we don't have enough money. So if there's anybody on board tonight that is interested in this technology or this idea, we certainly have a lot of waste, but we need some smart young people that know how to turn it into value and take it away from being a pollutant. Give her a call and send her a check is my answer tonight. So I'm just going to wrap up and imagine Sudbury in 30 years from now. And this is a phrase that Bruce Mao brought to the city when he talked about a livable Sudbury. I think Naomi and Lily might be on tonight. And it inspired me when he thought of Sudbury as, rather than going to a park, why can't we live in the park and bring the park to the city? But in the greater city, there will always have to be values from the park and strategic metals. And we have to clear our heads a little bit about anti this and anti that. A modern mine looks like the nickel rim mine up at the top, where the footprint of the mine is no bigger than the Walmart big box store. And it's a disposable mine on asphalt that when the mine is finished, it's removed. So that's the kind of concept we have to allow in the future. So, local food is a key issue of many of the people on tonight, and that we have to start. If you look just above the city, you'll see the patterned landscape of the valley in the bottom of the crater where the farms are still present there. You can see them in their squares. We've got to increase our food production and the same with sustainable forestry. We're not going to be cutting down the regreening trees right away, but the larger area of Sudbury is still a commercial forestry area, and it has to be done in a way that is sustainable, and that wood has to be used effectively in carbon storage. Biomining is something I hope is new to you tonight, but it's something that is part of the future. And then depending on where we are with government and where the price of carbon will be in the future, it can't stay at the level it is now. It has to rise up to European levels in the 100 to 150 level to make many of the technologies feasible for carbon storage. But we do need to find ways of storing carbon in concrete and wood and other safe places, including trees, yes, as many as we can, of course. So that's my fun of tonight of imagining the future. I hope I'm alive to see it, and I hope some people are here to make it happen. So this is the campus we're at, a lovely campus with 5 lakes, and that's a picture of the Living with Lake Center that we're so proud of for its green features, but more so the kind of young people and the quality of the research that gets attracted to the site. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, John. Just took me a second to get myself unmuted there. So I'm going to handle the Q&A period. And we've got a dozen questions or so already in the line. And certainly if we have time, other people are open to adding to that. Please go for it. And anything that doesn't get addressed live today, we can always follow up with John virtually later. So
and we want to pass some of them on to the next talks and have people
yes.
attend the full series.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of these topics will be picked up again throughout the series. So that's great. Our first question isn't really about your talk, John, but it's about how youth or teenagers can get involved with the Junction Creek Stewardship Committee. I know they have a great website, junctioncreek.com, and certainly on resumes and stuff, we see lots of young people coming to us who have interacted with the committee in various ways. So I don't know.
So that's the answer. It's a wonderful group, and they have a good science focus, but please just look up, they have tremendous material, Junction Creek Stewardship Committee, and I hope some of them are there tonight.
Perfect. Okay, so our next question is, what is the best approach to decrease phosphorus levels in our lakes?
I guess that's a hard one. One of the problems is soil erosion in our city, still is to this day. We don't have proper construction bylaws. We don't have proper enforcement. You drive down Highway 69 and you see black fencing all along various ditches in the middle of nowhere, protecting beaver dams from nutrients that are flushing in those remote locations. But you go to $1 million properties on Ramsey Lake and no one installs a boom in the water, or the construction companies are not attuned to proper sediment control. And I would think strict enforcement of better building codes around lakes, in addition to the final full elimination of phosphorus-rich fertilizers in the city. There's no reason that we have to have those. And the agreement of the lake residents to the elimination of lawns is just let it go, sit on the deck, drink a beer, don't cut the grass, don't even have grass. Just avoid the whole phosphorus issue. But it's a very difficult issue if we don't manage erosion first.
Awesome. The next question is probably a little bit connected. It's from Terry. He said how you showed that emission reductions are so important in allowing nature to rebound. And what about when you add other types of actions like intact shoreline, better vegetated community, and their effects on in-lake conditions?
Yeah, everything is added on top of that. We start with source control, whether it's runoff from construction sites, whether it's the drainage systems that most people have no idea where materials go in storm drains. Our city is completely, and storm drains are a direct input to the lakes. So lake associations should find out where all their storm drains are, monitor those drains, because those are usually the hot spots. But every incremental benefit adds to the value of that, and shoreline protection we should follow the rules that were set in the Lake Simcoe Act and try our best to get to 30 meters of undisturbed shoreline. So we want setbacks of septic tanks to be further back than that, but we'll try our best to get a minimum of 30 meters.
Okay, one more from Terry. With DOCs, or dissolved organic carbon's importance in binding up metals, retaining wetlands on landscapes seem to be also doubly important. Sort of a statement, but also a question.
Hugely important to protect our wetlands for every purpose, that they're not only sources of a habitat, they regulate water levels. They do produce DOC, but their main, they're absorbing nutrients. So we really need to be very, very protective of wetlands. Seems to be the nature's best solution around our lakes is the wetlands.
All right. Our next question, what is the relationship between bass and roads? Something you and I have talked about a lot, John.
Yeah, bass and roads is you and I, is that, and I fear that our use of nature, we all need to go there. We bring invasive species with us. And when there are roads, fishing and fishermen are carrying bait buckets. Usually people don't want to pay for the cost of bait, so they collect it in one lake, and they get to another lake and they go through their bait and say, oh, I don't want to put a bass on. I just let him go. It'll make a good bass fishery. So people are unintentionally moving species all the time, and the proximity to roads is just that, is the opportunity for invasive species is highly correlated to the prevalence of roads.
Our next question is from our own Peter Beckett. If you remove all wood, how do you maintain nutrient cycling?
You don't, Peter. I didn't intend to remove the dead wood. I just saw the dead wood as kind of equivalent to, so no, I don't want to take any dead wood off the sites. I want that all to stay. But if they're going to harvest trees, which they are to make a living, it would be nice to support a forestry industry that has sustainable products in it. Thank you for reminding me when I make a mistake.
Okay, now from Norm, and I think he'll probably be able to speak to this in his own talk a little bit, but might the 60% of soil carbon in Sudbury soils be also true in Muskoka soils?
Yeah, that's just a Wikipedia site. So that's the expected value everywhere, and we lack any, right now we have very, very little soil and very little carbon storage in soil. So Norm, you'll know that the typical reservoir for carbon all over the region is the soil itself. So anything you can do to protect and restore the soil is aiding in the battle for climate.
Okay, so we're going to move over to climate a little bit with the next question. If addressing source control is the best way to combat climate change, how quickly must we be reducing CO2 production, and what implications are there for our love of the automobile?
Well, you know, it is a crisis. It is a war. So there's hard decisions have to be made, and they have to be made soon. So we have to get off of those fossil fuels as fast as we possibly can. And we make the argument that we need the money from fossil fuel use to pay for technologies. That's bigger minds than mine of how we make that progression, but it has to go quickly.
Our next one is, what role can a circular economy play in the Sudbury area to reduce carbon emissions?
Well, the type of, for instance, the type of mining we're talking about is a low carbon, waste products have already expended a great deal of fossil fuel energy or in their creation. So we eliminate that if we can use that as a product stream to the next site. Think of it in terms of off gases from the landfill site is we should be capturing that and using that as a natural gas source to heat homes. So there's a whole, if you start to think of nature as not producing waste, but we produced vast amounts of waste. Any waste product you can think of in Sudbury should have, in time, should be a part of the supply chain to something else, and that's the sense of what a circular economy is, that products remain in the region but are transformed. And one of the beauties of metals is metals are indestructible, largely indestructible. So, they can be brought back into production. The smelter can absorb vast amounts of waste. It can take batteries, it can take catalytic converters, and And a lot of e-waste can be harvested and used as a fuel. So I think if we all wrap our heads around the circular economy idea, there's a lot of new industries that could take up and create great new jobs for young people and entrepreneurs.
Okay. Our next question goes back to the importance of wetlands. And if protections are being removed from provincially significant wetlands, what happens to carbon storage?
Nothing good. If we're letting our governments diminish our protection, we're putting our next generation at risk. And we just can't stand for it. And the same locally, we can't be draining in Ponderosa wetlands to build a few more houses or think that draining the water is the way to avoid floods. That's not going to do anything. So we need, as we've done on other issues, is vote for people that support wetlands and vote against people that don't.
Our next question, why do you question the trillion tree plan?
Because if you look at Thomas Crowther's YouTube video, you can see he himself was caught in this scheme that he published the original papers that predicted that 3 million trees was needed, and then realized it was used as an excuse for not doing anything, and that instead of trees and healthy forest, it was being substituted for palm oil production and eucalyptus fiber at the great detriment of biodiversity and water quality. And that there really isn't enough, you can't speak against trees, that we need many, many more trees, but we can't delay the reduction in fossil fuel use by, like, the $3 billion we're going to invest in the Billion Tree campaign should be given to technology for cleaning up industrial pollutants. It would be better spent reducing carbon production rather than carbon sequestration. So it's just, it's not an and or. We have to have trees and we want as many as we can, but we can't be giving subsidies to companies that produce carbon dioxide, and we can't deny the need for innovation funding to stop CO2 production. So it's just a reality check that what's easy and I hate to, the good intentions of youth and clubs that do such great work on tree planting, all of that is good and all of that's needed for habitat and many, many other reasons. But its prime reason is not for carbon sequestration around the world.
So Richard asks our next question, will locally grown food and animals like fish or venison have toxic levels of heavy metals?
They don't need to. Right now, if Peter was able to answer, it's not the case right now, as we have looked carefully at blueberries and other plants, and they're relatively free of metals. The organic matter is powerful at holding those metals. So there's no reason to live in fear that we can't produce clean food. And every time we've looked in the local market, foods and others, we are producing good quality, safe foods. And the fish, if you look on the guide to eating sport fish, you will indeed find more exceedances in Algonquin Park than you will in Sudbury. And that is one of the quirks of our site, but If we also go after coal burning in worldwide and eliminate it as we have in Ontario, but eliminate it all over the US as Biden is hoping to do, we should be reducing those pollutants as well.
You can hear your lovely granddaughter contributing to the talk, John, but
That's the
not very
next
much.
generation. She needs
Yeah.
a job out there. So
She needs a spot.
with
Okay.
COVID, I've got another family living in my house, even though I've got a broken roof.
Such are the times. What is Sudbury doing to export the vast industrial expertise about reclamation and the new economy?
Not enough. We are hosting various events. What we're doing tonight is part of it. We have to do more. We have various parts of the university that promote these technologies. One thing to think about in the whole debate around jobs is that when I came to Sudbury, there was 20,000 underground miners. Now I don't know exact number, around 5 or 3 to 5, but they're producing as many tons of nickel for batteries and other things now than they were then. 15,000 workers are working in the service industry in 80 or 90 new innovative companies that sell mining technologies around the world on the internet. And that will be the same, I believe, in mine waste management and forest products. Is the technology development is an enormous generator of jobs. And we need to invest in high-end technology training, but the opportunity to talk about it is there, various aspects of Sudbury are trying to promote it, but the more that we could, the better.
Okay, so our next question is that you mentioned that sulfur dioxide is poisonous to the environment and that it turns into sulfuric acid when it's released into the atmosphere. Are sulfur dioxide and sulfuric acid separate compounds, or are they one and the same?
It's released as sulfur dioxide, and then in combination to water, it turns into sulfuric acid. We usually see it in our lakes as sulfate, but as I mentioned, it's a pretty nasty thing if you've been in chemistry lab and you spilt it on your lab jacket. But sulfate reducing bacteria live in lakes, and they go after these compounds as well. So I'm learning old dog to the tricks here, but the microbial world is a fascinating world of solutions that we haven't yet found them all out. And I encourage people to study more microbiology when they go to university and to consider some of these biotech approaches. But sulfuric acid was the big problem, but it's now harvestable. When you look at superstack, it's been replaced with a tiny little white stack that shows up over the hill, but that's connected to an acid plant. And rather than the sulfur going into the atmosphere, it's captured and turned into products and sold to other companies. So that's the kind of thinking the circular economy is, because everything that is a pollutant is somebody else's product. And energy waste is one of the greatest pollutions. But no manager wants to spend money on energy, but he or she, are completely happy to waste it. So a better way to think about the circular economy is a zero waste economy, a zero waste community. And that is a much more enticing term than sustainable development, because nobody grew up liking the idea of waste. And everything that is a pollution product is a waste.
So I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions live, and we'll make sure that John and the rest of the speakers get any questions that aren't answered, and they can come up in future talks. What about the accumulation of salt in water from roads and large parking lots? I know this is going to come up in some of the other talks.
Yeah, they're going to tackle that one. It's another rather intractable problem that if we get it into the water system, it's very, very hard to reduce its impacts. When road salts are rising as they are in Ramsey or Nepawin, they're also a signal that land practices are poor. It's almost a tracer of bad practices on the land, because that's where the salt is coming from by way of drainage. So it can, the most permanent solution is dilution of road salt, is cleaner water, cleaner rain. A lake like Nepawin might take 3 to 5 years to flush itself out. So if we're flushing lakes with cleaner water with less salt in them, in time we're going to reduce it. But it's very difficult to deal with in solution right now. So it's an issue where we just have to, like sulfur to the atmosphere and use of fossil fuels, we just have to call a halt to it.
So we'll go for one more question. We'll have to answer it fairly quickly, but it's interesting. Is gray water from boats still allowed to be dumped in lakes?
I don't know what the rules are with gray water in boats, so that's the answer.
Okay. Well, I think we should leave the question period there.
Somebody from the cottage country area would know that one. So it's a pleasure to meet with everybody tonight. I hope some of this was helpful.
Well, this brings us to the end of our session tonight. I thought that we had allowed enough time for questions, but obviously I think there's still 17 open. So I'm pretty amazed at how many questions came in, and I'm sorry we weren't able to answer all of them. Perhaps another night. I'd like to thank all the people who contributed to this webinar, the audience and their questions, those working the production back end, Terry Reese from FOCA, Bree Edwards from Ballet Living with Lake Center, and particularly our speaker, Dr. John Gunn, an insightful and comprehensive presentation that has provided us with much to consider as we endeavor to respond positively to the climate crisis. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
When you leave the webinar today, you're going to be linked to a survey. We welcome any feedback you can provide about this presentation. And I want to remind people that the presentation next week at the same time, using the same URL, will be by Dr. Norman Yan, and his presentation is entitled "From Fireplace to Pancakes, Solving the Widespread Problem of Calcium Decline in Ontario, Starting in Sugar Bushes." We welcome your participation in this event. Please stay safe by following the COVID regulations in your area, and good night.